Welcome to the Deep Dives. Today we're tackling something that's really all around us, but maybe we don't always think about it fully. Electromagnetic fields. EMFs.
Right.
And usually the conversation is about, how they affect us humans. But what about our pets? Our dogs, cats, birds, you name it. We're going to explore how these invisible energies from, say, power lines outside to a Wi-Fi router in your living room could be impacting their health.
Yeah, it's a really important question.
Yeah.
Because they're right there with us, experiencing the same environment.
It might not be the first thing people worry about, but given how much tech we have and how close we are to our animals, well, it seems worth digging into.
Absolutely. We're all swimming in this electromagnetic soup, so to speak. And while the human health debate goes on, our pets are right there too. Often, maybe even closer to the sources.
Closer? How so?
Well, we'll get into that. But also, it's interesting to think about whether their biology, being different from ours, might make them react differently, perhaps be more sensitive.
Okay, let's back up a tiny bit. For anyone listening, what exactly are we talking about with EMFs, and why should a pet owner, tune in?
Okay, good point. So EMFs are basically invisible areas of energy. They come from electrical devices. We usually split them into two main types.
Right.
You've got low-frequency EMFs. Think power lines, electrical wiring in the walls, most household appliances.
Okay.
And then there's radio frequency EMFs, RF. That's your wireless technology. So cell phones, Wi-Fi routers, Bluetooth, smart meters, that kind of thing.
Gotcha. Wireless is RF.
Exactly. And it's worth mentioning organizations like the World Health Organization, WHO, they've actually classified some types of RF exposure as possibly carcinogenic to humans. Group 2B.
Possibly carcinogenic. Okay.
So, if there's even a potential question mark there for us, it really makes you think, well, what could the implications be for our pets? They share our homes so closely.
It definitely follows. So our mission today for this deep dive is to really explore those potential risks for pets. We've looked at an article specifically on EMFs and pet health to guide us.
Right.
And importantly, we want to give you some practical, actual steps you might consider taking, things you can do to maybe lower the exposure in your home.
Yeah, make it a bit more electromagnetically quiet, perhaps.
So where do we start? Why might pets be more vulnerable in the first place?
Well, one of the first things is just simple proximity. Think about it. Indoor pets, especially, spend so much time inside.
Right. Most of their lives, for some.
Exactly. And where do they hang out? Often really close to devices emitting EMFs. Maybe the dog snoozes near the TV console, or the cat loves that warm spot on top of the internet router.
Yeah, I've seen that, the warm router spot.
And they're often lower to the ground, too, which might put them closer to floor-level wiring or certain appliances.
That's a really good point. It's not just being in the room, it's being right next to the source sometimes.
Precisely. Then you have their physiology. Generally, pets are smaller than us.
Obviously.
Which means they have a different surface area to volume ratio. Think of it like a smaller object might absorb energy differently relative to its total mass compared to a larger one.
Okay, so their size itself could be a factor in how they interact with these fields.
It's a factor to consider, yes. And then there's this really fascinating biological aspect. Potential heightened sensitivities in some animals.
Heightened sensitivities, like...
Well, some animals, like birds, bees. There's even research suggesting maybe dogs and other mammals. They have this incredible ability called magnetoreception.
Magnetoreception. Sounds like something from sci-fi.
It does a bit.
Yeah.
But it's real. It's like a built-in biological compass. They can actually sense the Earth's natural magnetic field. They use it for navigation, orientation.
Wow. Okay.
So the thinking is, could all these artificial EMFs we're creating interfere with that delicate natural sense, like adding static or noise to their internal GPS?
That could be really disorienting for them.
It could. For migrating birds, it might mean getting lost. For bees, maybe trouble finding the hive. For our pets, well, it's less clear, but maybe it contributes to confusion, anxiety, or changes in how they navigate even familiar spaces.
Like throwing off their natural instincts in subtle ways.
Exactly. It's like we're polluting their sensory environment in a way we can't directly perceive ourselves. And then there's just the sheer duration of exposure.
Right. Constant exposure.
Especially for indoor pets in smart homes. Wi-Fi always on, maybe smart speakers, smart lights, all sorts of Internet of Things devices. It adds up. It's not just short bursts, it's near constant low-level exposure.
And we don't really know the long-term effects of that, do we?
That's the big question. The cumulative effect of chronic low-level exposure is still a major area that needs more research. It's like a slow drip, and we're trying to figure out when the bucket gets full.
Okay, so let's get into what the science is starting to suggest.
Yeah.
How might this EMF exposure actually be impacting animals?
Well, let's start with that magnetoreception angle we just touched on.
Yeah, that was fascinating.
Research does suggest that artificial EMFs can disrupt this sense. Like we said, disorientation in birds, navigation issues in bees, these are documented. For our pets, maybe it manifests more subtly, but that fundamental biological system could still be affected.
It's kind of unnerving. What about impacts we might actually see, like their behavior or health?
Right. There is a growing body of work looking at behavioral changes. Some studies, and quite a bit of anecdotal reporting too, suggest links between EMM exposure and things like increased anxiety, restlessness, even potentially aggression in some animals.
Really? Aggression?
Potentially. Also sleep disturbances, maybe being less playful, less active overall. And you hear stories from pet owners, right? Their dog seems stressed near the smart meter, or the cat avoids a certain corner near the Wi-Fi router.
Yeah, I've definitely heard people mention things like that. The cat who suddenly avoids their favorite sleeping spot, who maybe there's an invisible reason.
It's certainly something to consider. It warrants investigation. Then, moving beyond behavior, there's research, mostly in lab animals like rodents, looking at effects at the cellular level.
Okay, what kind of effects?
Things like oxidative stress, you can think of that as like cellular damage or rusting caused by unstable molecules. Also, DNA fragmentation, actual damage to the genetic material in cells.
Wow, DNA damage.
Yes. That's been observed in some studies. Also changes in hormone levels, melatonin, which is key for sleep,
Right.
and cortisol, the main stress hormone. And some studies also suggest impacts on the immune system, maybe suppressing it to some degree.
Now, we should probably add a caveat here, right? These lab studies often use higher levels of EMFs than typical home environments.
Absolutely, that's a crucial point. The exposure levels in many lab studies are significantly higher than what your pet likely experiences sitting on the couch. However, the question mark remains over that chronic low-level exposure. Does years and years of lower-level exposure eventually add up to cause similar problems? Or different problems? That's what we don't fully understand yet. It's the cumulative dose over time.
Right, the long game. What about the really serious stuff, like cancer? Is there any link suggested there in animals?
That's a really sensitive area, and the research specifically in pets is quite limited. Some lab animal studies have suggested a possible link between long-term EMF exposure and increased risk of certain tumors, especially maybe in tissues close to the exposure source. And then you look at trends in pet health. We are seeing rises in certain cancers in pets, like lymphoma in dogs and cats.
Yeah, you hear about that more often, it seems.
We do. Now, can we draw a direct line from EMFs to that? No, absolutely not, based on current evidence. There are many potential factors, but it raises the question, could environmental factors, including EMFs, be part of that complex picture? Does chronic low-level inflammation, perhaps triggered by EMF exposure, play a role? It's something researchers are considering.
So it sounds like the picture is, well, incomplete. Lots of suggestive findings, some concerning correlations, but no definitive smoking gun yet.
That's a fair summary, yes. Which is why anecdotal evidence, while not proof, becomes interesting.
You mentioned some earlier. Can you share a few more examples of what pet owners report seeing?
Sure. You hear reports of dogs becoming noticeably more anxious or agitated in homes that are heavily kitted out with smart devices.
Right.
Some people describe their pets acting almost frantic near a Wi-Fi router or maybe a newly installed smart meter. Then there are bird breeders who've observed changes in mating behavior or higher stress levels when cell towers are nearby, or even just strong Wi-Fi signals in the vicinity.
Interesting. Birds seem particularly sensitive.
They might be, given the magnetoreception aspect. And as we mentioned, the classic example is cats avoiding spots near power strips, routers, modems, that kind of thing. They seem to find a quieter spot.
It really is striking how these individual observations seem to line up with some of the potential effects seen in research. It makes you think.
It does. It highlights the need for more systematic investigation into what animals might actually be sensing or reacting to.
Okay, so given all this, what can people listening actually do? What are some practical steps to maybe reduce their pet's EMF exposure?
The good news is there are quite a few relatively simple things people can try. It doesn't have to be extreme.
Like what?
Well, number one, just be mindful of your wireless usage. Maybe turn the Wi-Fi router off at night. When everyone's asleep, you're not using it anyway. That cuts down hours of exposure right there.
That's easy enough.
Yeah. And putting your phone, tablets, etc. on airplane mode when you don't actively need the connection, that stops them constantly sending and receiving signals.
Okay.
And a really basic one. Just look where your pet sleeps or spends most of their time. Is the router right next to their bed? Is their favorite nap spot on top of the game console? Try to move their resting spots away from those strong sources. Distance helps a lot.
Distance is key. Create some separation.
Exactly. Build in some breaks from the exposure and create physical distance. You could even think about creating specific low EMF zones in your house.
Like a tech-free corner.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
An area where the pet can rest that's intentionally kept clear of electronics. Some people go further and look into shielding materials or even build a simple Faraday cage around a pet bed, though that's more involved.
Right.
But even just keeping pet beds away from power strips, walls with lots of wiring, TVs, wireless speakers, that makes a difference.
What about the tech itself? Any choices we can make there?
Definitely. Where it's practical, choose wired connections over wireless. Use an Ethernet cable for your computer instead of Wi-Fi if you can.
Old school.
Yeah, a bit, but it significantly reduces the RF fields in that area. Also, maybe reconsider things like Bluetooth pet collars or trackers. They emit RF signals constantly right near the animal's body. Are they truly essential, or are there alternatives?
Good point. What about getting pets back to nature, so to speak? Does that help?
Absolutely. Spending time outdoors is great for lots of reasons, but it also gives them a break from the concentrated indoor EMF environment. Plus, there's the concept of grounding or earthing.
Earthing.
Yeah, direct contact with the earth, like walking barefoot on grass. It's thought to help stabilize the body's electrical state in humans. It's plausible it could benefit animals too. Let them walk on the grass, lie in the dirt. It might help dissipate static buildup and reconnect them with natural frequencies.
More park time, less screen time for pets.
Something like that. And finally, just be observant. Watch your pet.
What should people look out for? Signs that might suggest sensitivity.
Really, any unexplained changes. Sudden anxiety, restlessness, maybe changes in sleep, reluctance to go into certain areas. If you see things like that and your vet can't find an obvious medical cause, consider the environment. Could EMFs be a factor? Keep a little log. Maybe note when the symptoms appear, where the pet is.
And then discuss it with the vet.
Yes, discuss it with your vet.
Yeah.
Which brings us to their perspective.
Right. What is the general view in the veterinary community on this?
Well, it's definitely an evolving area. You'll find more awareness among holistic or integrative veterinarians. Some of them are incorporating EMF assessment into their approach. They might report seeing correlations between high EMF homes and issues like chronic inflammation, weird neurological symptoms, or behavioral problems that are hard to explain otherwise.
So some vets are definitely clued in.
Some are, yes. But in mainstream veterinary science, it's fair to say it's still pretty early days. It's not typically part of standard diagnosis or environmental assessment yet. We really need more research specifically focused on pets for it to become more widely recognized.
Okay, so wrapping this all up, if there's one key message for listeners to take away from this deep dive, what would it be?
I think the main point is, look, we don't have all the definitive answers yet. The science on harm from everyday EMF levels for pets is still developing, but there's enough suggestive evidence from lab studies, from animal behavior, from magnetoreception research to say that taking some simple precautionary steps seems prudent. It's a responsible thing to do for our animals.
Erring on the side of caution.
Exactly. Reducing their exposure where you easily can.
Yeah.
It might contribute positively to their long-term health and well-being. They rely on us to create a safe environment, right?
It really does come down to awareness and just being proactive, like we do or should do for kids with potential environmental risks. Extend that same care to our furry family members.
Well said. And if people want to read more, there are resources. The Bio Initiative report is quite comprehensive, though dense. Websites like Environmental Health Trust, EMF Academy, they have information. Sometimes magazines like Pet Wellness Magazine touch on it too. And
talk to your vet, especially if they have a holistic or integrative approach.
Definitely. If you have specific concerns, finding a vet open to discussing environmental factors like EMFs could be really helpful.
This has been incredibly insightful, really makes you think about this invisible world we've created. So maybe a final thought for everyone listening. As our technology just keeps accelerating, faster and faster, What other subtle, maybe unseen impacts is it having on all the living things around us? And what's our responsibility, really, to try and understand that and maybe, mitigate any negative effects?
Definitely some food for thought.
It really is.
Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.